So perfect. Welcome to the next big thing. Joining me today is May Rodriguez, Executive Director of the Bantayog Foundation. So she has been an activist and journalist who has been covering pretty much the impact of the Marcos family and the impact of the martial law on the Philippines and what had the impact of its people as well. And as well, we're going to talk about what the future holds for the country of the Philippines later on as well. So, May Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, your work with the foundation highlights the impact of the martial law set by the Marcos presidency in the 1970s. So this year marks the 49th year since the martial law took effect. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of your foundation and what it means to remember the impact of the martial law 49 years later?
Yeah, thank you. The foundation Bantayog ng mga bayani, it means um, a monument for heroes. That's what it means. And in 1986, after the dictatorship had ended, a group of progressive politicians and activists said that we we probably need to consider what happens in the next few years after Filipinos have gotten used to their freedoms and to speaking out, and they might forget what went on in the past. They might forget the sacrifices that had to be done to defeat a dictatorship. And so they decided to organize themselves and create this foundation. At first, all they wanted to do was to create a monument, a physical monument. But as the months went on, they decided that more was needed to be done, and that was to put a human face to the concept of heroism. And so they started to do more research on the lives of individuals who who gave up much, um, their lives, their families, their careers, um, their future basically, so that they could contribute to the struggle to defeat the dictatorship. And this was wide ranging. Some were, um, well, comfortable in life, but some were really in great uh, need all the time. Some were women, some were men, some were very young, some were old, some were from the indigenous communities, some were businessmen, and so on. So that is how it started, and eventually, we it became a tradition to honor them every November, this coming month, um, to remember again. So every November they are remembered. But besides that, we have started a website for every person that we have ever honored. That's so far 300 plus names have a short biography so that each student that wants to learn more about these persons, for instance, if somebody came from your school or from your particular territory in the Philippines, then you have a chance of knowing a bit of the life of that person. So it has gone on since 1986. We're also 35 years now.
And tell me a little bit about your interest in wanting to cover the impact and wanting to be involved as with your activism. Tell me about why you wanted to be involved in the first place.
Well, I was an activist in that time of the dictatorship. And in 2 years from the beginning of the dictatorship, I was one of those arrested early and heavily tortured. And I was also witness to a lot of young people like me being tortured. Um, so that that set something in me that has stayed with me today. that a government of the people cannot do this to protesters, to those who disagree. And much of my life after that has been shaped by that experience.
And so in the 80s, Marcos was then the Marcos family was then ousted by the Philippines, by the people of the Philippines. And um it also brought light, when the his rival was assassinated as well, Aquino. So when people actually ousted the Marcos family, what do you think they accomplished by this? What was something that led them forward to accomplishment, I guess, in that era?
Today, it's difficult to imagine what it was in those days, 30, 40, 50, 30, 40 years ago. But living under a dictatorship is like living in constant terror. So imagine a teacher of social science being unable to teach what was going on. It was your duty to tell your students that this is democracy, this is what democracy is supposed to be. But you are, by virtue of being under a dictatorship, you are forced to say that we are under a government that loves the people, that cares for the people, and never mind that it has authoritarian tendencies, but it is for our good. It is for our sake. And all the time, people were being arrested, tortured. So it brainwashes you. It allows you. It forces you to control your mind so that, in order to be able to survive that dictatorship, you had to be blind to its excesses. And so that went on with the entire population. You cannot talk um, about anything critical of that dictatorship. That is what is damaging. Besides the fact that billions were stolen, and therefore we're still paying for the loans that went into that plunder. Besides the fact that many individuals were put into prison, the really almost like long term effect of a dictatorship is that it brainwashes you, and you don't even know that part of your brain that is self-censoring. And that is permanent, I say, because teachers in particular had to teach it to their young ones. And the young ones, as they became adults, they also were scared to be critical. And until now, that self-censorship remains. Many teachers in our public schools are scared to say that dictatorship is bad, that fighting a dictatorship wasn't something illegal. They still do not know exactly how to teach it to their young people.
And so, with the Marcos family being in power, as you've talked about, with these billions of the billions that were stole, that were, yeah, billions of pesos that were stole from the Philippines. How did they, like? How could they have continued knowing that the population was perhaps deteriorating, or economically and socially? How could they continue knowing that this was happening in their country?
I don't know how they could do that. I can only tell you that they did it consistently. They did it they planned it, they did it, they knew they were playing with the people's money. They were using our central bank, dipping into the money from the central bank. They were they were supporting projects that they received commissions from. And the most notorious of that is a nuclear power plant that doubled in cost, that never operated, and had been proven to have paid the Marcoses commission so that outrageous project could continue.
And so I've oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have no explanation for what went on with their minds. I can only say that they wanted permanent power. They wanted to stay permanently in power. They enjoyed the perks of that power.
Mm. And so when they started to lose this power in the mid 80s, how did that sort of shift the country or shift the population when the country started to see this like shift in power or sort of this decline in power from them?
On the Marcoses side, they became even more violent. It started particularly in the early 1980s. In 1981, Marcos was supposed to have lifted the legal reason for his dictatorship. It was martial law. He was supposed to have lifted martial law right at the time that the Pope was coming to visit. But at that time, assassinations rose, more arrests, um, um, missing people. There were more people being abducted and not being seen again. So as they started to feel a loss of control, they went even more violent. It went on and on. And that explains partly why, after the assassination of the Senator Aquino in 1983, the people that were at first scared or confused, or maybe who bought into the agenda of the Marcoses, they realized it wasn't going to go easier at all. It was going to grow worse and worse. And so on 2 years after the 81, 82, 83, it was just getting worse. Lawyers were being assassinated, um, and so on. So by 1983, when the senator was assassinated, the main call among Filipinos was justice for Aquino, justice for all. They connected all the previous abuses to the last event of the assassination of Senator Aquino. By then, the fear had largely been, it was gone. People were going out, people were daring to join rallies, and so on. So um, it was a matter of time, really.
Hmm. And so would you say that point in time, when they wanted justice to be served for all, would you say that was the turning point for the country of the Philippines, or you know would they have gone further on to turn the country to where it is now?
Would they have gone to, pardon me, can you give the last question again?
Sure, sure.
Would they have,
So I guess my question was, would when they uh, so with the assassination of the of Aquino, would that is that the turning point? Would that have been the turning point for the Philippines, for the country of the Philippines?
yes, definitely, as I said, um, people who used to think that they could tolerate the situation suddenly felt that it wasn't going to get to be easier. It was going to grow worse. And if they could assassinate a senator who was unarmed, who was by himself coming home, then they could do that to anyone. And those who did not believe that tortures were going on, detentions were going on, suddenly felt that it was a possibility. The minds were open, and when the portions of media, this is the key also, portions of media, local media, had started to dare write critical stories. Um, the small media had been writing small things from the early 80s, But by that time, 1983 and 1984, the newsstands had small publications that were actually very critical of the Marcoses. They could not control it anymore. Um, so yes, it's a turning point. Also, as people dared to get out, then they encouraged more people to get out. They opened the minds of more people. So it was a river growing and growing and growing until it just could not be contained and they had to erupt into a people power.
So I guess when we talk about the Marcos family, a lot of people think about this fortune, this ongoing wealth, and this increasing fortune that they had. And one of the things was this when Marcos had died, the president. A lot of people were baffled with how did they get rich so quickly. Where did this huge amount of gold come from, or this huge amount of money come from? What would you say those what was the speculation at that time? Why did people speculate that they got rich quickly and no one knew where this money came from?
They did not grow rich quickly. Um, the the stealing went on very early. In fact, it has been documented that Ferdinand Marcos was arrested by the Americans during the war because of black marketing, meaning selling American goods to Japanese soldiers, Japanese. He was almost executed at that time. It was wartime and he was selling American goods. That was 1940s. So Marcos um, knew how to manipulate things. And he wasn't yet president when he started an offshore bank account. So and of course when he was president, he had all the means, and it has been documented how he did it. He skimmed off foreign funds. He accepted commissions and so on. It has documentation of how he managed to accumulate the huge amounts that were found with the family to the estimate of $5 billion up to $10 billion. And if media is captive, if media is unable to investigate, then we actually did not know what was going on. Very few Filipinos knew what was going on. We only knew that Imelda was living luxuriously. She flew airplane, she went to all of these places, she had jewelry. That was the what we knew. We did not know the massive collection of funds. We did not know they were dipping into and of course it was logical, but they were dipping into the central bank and the banks, the other banks.
Hmm. And so, how did that, with I was watching the documentary as well, and one of the things that I saw was that the Philippines had a tour of the Marcos estate at one point, and they saw how lavishly they were living and how grand they were living, and I was just thinking to myself, like, first of all, why did they choose to view these estates? And I just can't imagine how the people of Philippines must feel, going into this life of luxury for what 10 minutes or so, and just seeing like how well they were living.
Yes, Imelda had jars and jars of perfume. That was one of the takeaways of one of my friends that joined that tour. It didn't take very long after a few weeks it was suspended. What did the people think? sometimes I think it was hard to believe. You cannot, living in poverty, you cannot imagine the cost of a single earring, a single pair of earrings, and so on. So I think it was hard to imagine for the poor people to um, understand the great wealth that was accumulated by the family. What they knew though was that um, hospitals were in having tight budgets and so on. So at that time, that was, I remember when people started to complain that in public hospitals you had to buy your own cotton. So whereas they were having the time of their lives, the poor people, when they got sick and went into public hospitals that were supposed to give them free health care, they had to buy their own cotton.
Mm. So, let me just, sorry. Um, so with the Marcos being in power, I just, um, there was a lot of people, wondered, how did they, again, where did this money come from, and how did they accumulate so much wealth? And obviously, you've said in the documentary that, we know where this money had come from, and where in the world it's dispersed. But one of the things that I feel the media played a huge role in covering what the Marcos family how the Marcos family impacted the Philippines. um but there was also this covering up of how the Marcos family, what the role was. um so why do you think the media didn't quite cover, I guess, the good parts of the Marcos family? Because before that, they had good intentions. I feel they knew, when when he ran for presidency, he had these good ideals for what the country was going to be. But why didn't the media cover those aspects? The good aspects, I guess.
The media, the the first actions of the Marcos dictatorship when it was installed was to take over media. And so for the longest time, all that you heard and all that you saw on television were Marcos propaganda. So all the good news was all that was available to us in the early years. So all we saw were marching songs from the dictatorship, marching songs that convinced us to follow rules, saying that discipline was what was going to save us. So we had that morning, lunch, and afternoon for our meals and for our snacks. So if you are saying what did the media do? The media, which was controlled and which was owned by the one of the biggest televisions, was given to the Romualdez family, which is the family of Imelda. So all we knew was good news in those early days. No news of resistance, no news of arrests, no news of tortures and deaths. And and you were lucky to read a column each of any bad news in the newspapers. Everything was good news. But as we say now, um, truth is difficult to hide. So it was able to travel by mouth, and this little photocopied pieces of news that came from abroad, because only foreign journalists had the freedom to write. So we would get articles from abroad, and it would come in, and there was um, there was no way to reproduce it but to photocopy. So we photocopied and spread it. And that is how the little lights gave us some vision from the darkness of those years. Yeah, but
Hmm.
eventually, as I said, in the 1980s, they could not contain anymore the journalists that wanted to write about the real things that were going on. And also, it was so helpful that the Amnesty International and some church groups had developed an interest on what was going on in the Philippines. So we had, I would say, a growing solidarity movement abroad that helped spread, that helped open up what was closed here in the Philippines.
So one of the things that I found interesting was when Imelda Marcos had been welcomed back to the Philippines, and it was quite um, I guess disparaging to see it was quite disparaging to see that the Philippines, the people of the Philippines had welcomed her with open arms, despite the fact that her family had caused so much um, disruption and so much socioeconomic decline. um, in a way, does this, like, how does this uh, portray the people of the Philippines by welcoming somebody, or somebody who's part of a family who has ultimately destroyed them?
It certainly will confuse you, of course, if you
Yes.
are outside the country. But those who were videoed welcoming Imelda were of two kinds. One kind of crowd was the crowd that truly welcomed her, because there was. Those were the beneficiaries of her little gifts, the money she gave away, the little houses she built. So there was a crowd that truly welcomed her, wanted her back. There was also a crowd that was bought. That was uh, that was their own invention, the buying of crowds. They developed it in their time. You buy crowds to root for you, to line the streets and wave little flags. So they knew how to do that. So I think what we should have done was to call ourselves there also on the streets and to express our own um, anger and dismay at the family having been allowed in. But there is also this Filipino trait of tolerance. I think we are notorious for that. We thought that maybe this family having been well, we allowed them out. They were at the time some dictatorships had ended with the dictator getting killed, so they were allowed out. And now that we're allowing them in, we thought that maybe they had the decency to stay in the background, which of course they did not, because that was part of the agenda to gain power back. Yeah. It isn't easy to understand. In fact, today today it also is a confusing situation, because there is definitely a pushback from the Marcos crowd. They want the Marcoses back. Some people want the Marcoses really
Hmm.
back.
I mean, the son of Marcos is running for president. So in a way, doesn't that bring back a lot of that those memories of what his father had caused, in a way?
Um, yes and no. The the thing about the father is that um, the abuses were never really fully resolved, never fully established. There was a process a few years back of asking people to register and make and claim for abuses. So there was that, and 75,000 filed claims. 11,000 were found valid claims, and the rest not really invalid but uh, inadequate documentation. Um, so there's that process, but otherwise, um, people feel that that isn't a finished business. It hasn't been closed. And now that the Marcoses are back, that is being opened again. Now I say no because it's a different chapter. The father was really a wily man. He knew the law. He knew how to manipulate information. He had a charismatic personality, which this generation doesn't have. So they are mostly on the defensive. But the fight is different because now they have paid social media. So I think it's a different thing because you are fighting um, a ghost. You are fighting an image
Mm.
um, that is likely to, if you do not do it, is likely to gain power again. He will not, the son will probably not be as, if he becomes president, will probably not be as strong or as determined as the father. They want only to accomplish that dream when he was a young boy, that he will be president also like his father. But he has proven himself really um, an inferior copy of his father. So it's a different battle. I think we are fighting a battle of image only. Yeah.
And so, what do you think the people of the Philippines are looking for now with this presidency, this presidential race coming up? What do you think they're looking for in leadership right now?
Before our current president, President Duterte, that answer was easier. But with having had a president like President Duterte, people had an idea of the quick fix to solve the long-standing problems with quick fixes, like how President Duterte would say it, in 6 months I can solve this, in 3 months I can solve this. And since the problems have been long standing, it had an appeal that those problems would finally, the traffic, I will solve that in, the 2 hour traffic will be reduced to 30 minutes and so on. So now maybe there is that desire for quick fixes. And so, what we will be looking for, I think, is somebody who can explain to us that quick fixes are not what will solve problems. So, somebody who has the patience, who has the wisdom, who has the strength of will and of political will to explain all of this and to solve the problems with us in a long process. We cannot have quick fixes. I think that is now a big, huge problem, especially with the police having been allowed to um, implement their own quick fix of just killing people they suspected, or even if they were not suspects of being involved in drugs, that they would just kill people. That is another terrible quick fix that has to be corrected. So we have a different problem. We face a very difficult problem getting the institutions back.
So, do you think the people of Philippines are ready for a new government by the looks of it?
As I said, um, when, um, when you when you trust your people, when you trust your people, as you would probably imagine that people are basically good and wanting only the best for themselves, then I would imagine that the son should not be able to get the presidency. But the thing is, the family had known about social media and had wielded the power of social media for many years. We have found that some of the websites that were so innocent looking, like cooking websites and nostalgia websites, nostalgia being, oh, how good it was in Manila 50 years ago. Many innocent looking websites were, after all, Marcos websites. So it took them many, many, many years to develop their concept. And I am told the, that this was paid information, and they were advised how to do this. They were advised even how to handle themselves on their return to the Philippines. So that I that's it. We are what we are now fighting is an image, is a social media built image. And sometimes I don't know that we know it all. We are just trusting that if we speak out, us who were victims, if we speak out and explain that this is what went on in the past and this is what you don't know, that people will believe us. Some don't. They say that uh, s- um, we are still living in the past. Some say that we are um, yellow, yet part of the yellow crowd. Yellow crowd meaning the crowd that fought for the Aquinos, the senator and the widow. We are part of the yellow crowd. Or that, yes, we're simply just living in the past. And that is how they are handling the situation. The Marcoses, the new generation of Marcoses are handling the bad image. Move out of the past. The past is past. Let us go forward into the future. People are hungry. How long will you be talking about torture and plunder? People are hungry now. Yes, so they have line to follow. So in answer to your question, I am hoping that Filipinos will see through as I said, the ghost of the Marcos image.
Hmm. I was just my last question was gonna be like what your hope is for the Philippines, but I guess you know if you can elaborate a little bit on that before I let you go, um, where do you see the country going from year onwards? You know, I'm not sure who might win the presidency, but where do you see the country going from year onwards?
It can go either way. Up to this point, I have no confidence to say that Marcos might Marcos will lose. The Marcos Jr. will lose. So I am going to give you two scenarios. The first scenario would be if he loses. If he loses, I think that is the end of their attempt to return to power, because none in the family has ever shown himself or herself um, to be an able political leader, authoritarian or anything. After Ferdinand and he Ferdinand Jr. is not even that. He is just thrust into it. That's the role he had been developed to play from when he was a boy, to be president. And he didn't do good in school. He didn't do good anywhere. So he's not a very strong person. So if he loses, I don't think the Marcoses can recover ever. So they are going to have the fight of their lives. They will or everything to get him to win. The other scenario is if he wins. If he wins, um, all the worms will be coming out of the woodwork. But they face an opposition from the old rich that had found an accommodation with the new governments, because they will want to recover the part of the riches that they imagined were stolen from them by their cronies, by their friends. So it's not going to be easy either for them if Ferdinand Jr. Wins. But that is going to be heartbreaking if he wins, because it validates all their claims. It validates all the saying that if the Marcoses had stayed in power, we would be very prosperous. We would be, and so on. So, but I guess that's only 6 years. As I said, there's no one in the family, I think, that can take over after him. So that's 6 years. So it will be another rude awakening for the Philippines to see themselves in a government under Ferdinand Jr. But if he loses, and we're not sure if our vice president will win, but I think the middle class is turning for her, then we have a chance to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, from the economic effect of the pandemic, and maybe even from the destruction of the institutions that the Duterte administration had done.
Well, I think certainly we'll be watching for this election. I know it's like, a lot of people are are watching it around the world. But Mayor Rodriguez, I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your insight and sharing your knowledge with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you again. Thank you for giving me this chance to talk about our country.
Yep, no problem at all. Enjoy the rest of your day.